Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is going to be our first content lecture for which there is a quiz associated with it. You're going to want to complete that quiz by May 19th. Remember, those quizzes can't hurt you. They're extra credit. They can only help you. So in this class, what we're going to be covering is first what social psychology is. I'm a social psychologist by training, and our research topic on social class and ethics is a very deeply entrenched social psychology topic. So a lot of the methodology that you're going to be seeing in this class is relevant to social psychology. After that, we're going to be talking about how science is philosophy, with a few different topics that we're going to get into. And then the last piece of content is going to be focused on kind of an edgy topic, and this is the idea that science is also an art, and we're going to talk about creativity. So first things first, what is social psychology? This is the scientific study of the real, or the influence of real, implied, or imagined people on the way that we think, feel, and behave. So let's go ahead and break this definition down. First things first, who is doing the influencing? Other people, people who are actually there. I do research where we make stage scenarios right out in front of people. Like, for example, we had a scenario in which participants came into the lab and they were told, hey, we're running late. I'm going to need you to sit down in this chair and wait for me to set up the lab. Um, and after a moment or two, while we were out setting up the lab, there's some air quotes there. Uh, a person showed up on crutches and they looked around the room and realized they had no place to sit down. And we measured whether or not the person, the participant, got up out of their chair and offered it to the person on crutches. These are real other people, implied people. These are people who are led to believe, you're led to believe are there, but they're not actually there. I have participants playing games with ostensible other people online, and they are led to believe that these people are real. They're in fact not real. The game is all software generated, and we might do stuff like exclude the participant and see how they react. Another place that we go in social psychology is by imagining people. You all may have taken social psychology, and you've definitely taken intro to psychology where you got to learn a little bit about social psychology. We did a lot of unethical things as a field in our early history in social psychology. And so we moved away from things like the Milgram study to imagining how we might act in various situations. This has a very important place in social psychology, and it can help us to study things that are really hard to ethically pull off in the lab. Second part of the definition, what is being influenced? And this is easy as ABC. We studied how other people affect our affect. This is our emotional content, the way that we feel. We study the way that other people affect our behavior, the things that you actually do. And we study the way that other people change our thinking or our cognition. You can think of these as the ABCs of social psychology because the acronym here is affect, behavior, cognition, ABC. If you're ever feeling like the lecture is going too fast, you have a really unique situation here where you can pause it and take down whatever notes you're trying to take down. Um, so Hopefully we don't get too many comments that the course was too fast. You have full control over the speed of the course, my friends. Um, the next thing I want to talk about is how science is a philosophy. And right now, in your mind, what what do you think of when you hear the word scientist? You can pause the recording and think about that for a second. So what does a real scientist look like to you? And inevitably, when I ask this question in class, people tend to have a specific person in mind when they think about a scientist. And I want to challenge that idea for you, and that we're all scientists, and it's really part of who we are as people, as a species. So, what is science really about? Is it this picture that you see in your mind, or is there something more? So, the first thing that I want to say science is about is that it's social. We often do science in teams. You're going to be doing your research project in teams this semester. I review a lot of papers of other scientists in the field, and we make sure that that work adheres to top scientific standards. We go to conferences, present our work, and have people give us feedback. And sometimes we'll even share our work with the public through the media. I do this occasionally, and I'll talk with reporters about the science that we're doing in my lab. And this gets out into the public sector, and folks can access that science in a way that's more palatable than reading an empirical journal article. Okay, so to me, science is very social. We can't do it without other people. What else is science about? Probably been led to believe that science is a collection of facts. Instead of that, I think that, yeah, in some ways, yeah, it's a collection of facts, but those facts change when we learn more. We thought that we knew all about physics in the early 1900s, and then Einstein came along and completely changed the scope of what we know. And that's probably changed three more times since then. So for me, instead of science being about facts, I think it's about asking questions. Okay. Um, Science can't move forward if we're not willing to ask questions. If you've ever been around younger people, like 2 or 3 years old, they ask a lot of questions. And I think that that's a good way for scientists to be. So some questions that we might ask are like, what makes people make dispositional attributions? Why is the person who cut you off on I-81 a jerk? Um, why don't we say, well, maybe they're under a lot of stress right now and they didn't see me. So what's that all about? Why do people feel less compassion for outgroup members? These are some of the questions that we can ask. What's causing that? The third thing that I want to say that science is about is that it's all about you. Um, you know, we are in the business of bettering our lives through science. There's always a purpose to the science that we're doing. The questions that we ask are usually questions that help us uh, solve problems. And the science that we engage in can teach us a lot about ourselves and our place in the world, and our purpose in our communities. Um, Now, of course, depending on the field, it might not do this to the same extent, or it might do so more than social psychology. Um, but it also teaches how to make our communities a better place to live in. So our project this semester on social class and ethics is really right at the heart of all of this. So those are the three things that I think that science is really about. A couple other things I want to mention are uh, thinking about different goals in science. You've probably seen this a million times. We can have different types of goals. So one goal is to describe. We don't see this very much in research. This is where a researcher might set out to define the boundaries of what a variable is. So we see this a lot in the research that I do, empathy research, where there's probably just as many definitions of empathy as there are people who research it, and that can be a really bad place to be. Um, and so folks come along and then they try to define, what empathy is, what altruism is, what compassion is. These are all very different things, and we use the terms interchangeably. So descriptive research can be really important. Where we spend most of our time is in prediction. We try to predict people's behaviors. And here we'll set up an independent variable and a dependent variable. And we want to see if variation on that independent variable can help us to predict what you score on that dependent variable. We can also explain behavior. Uh, this is also not a place where social psychology goes very much. This is when we think about theorizing. Why do people do what they do? Unfortunately, social psychology doesn't do that very much. And then the last goal of science that we have is to control behavior. Social issues and social problems in the world motivate a lot of social psychology research. And usually we're doing research to help make people's lives better. I know that word control makes it seem like it's a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing what I'm talking about here. Instead, you know, maybe we can help people learn how to better regulate their emotions in everyday life with social psychology research. Maybe we can find ways to reduce prejudice in among people in a society. There's a lot of different ways that we can control behavior. So in this class, I want us to use some very specific terms about theories and hypotheses. A theory, and this again is our philosophy of science that we're talking about here, is a set of conceptual hypotheses. Conceptual hypotheses are going to be defined next. So it's an aggregate of these conceptual hypotheses that help us to explain and predict how something in the world works. So maybe I might have a theory that people like sweeter tasting ice cream. A conceptual hypothesis, this is what research theories are drawn from, make predictions about relationships among constructs. So if my theory is that people like sweeter tasting ice cream, maybe we might find that people like cookie dough flavored ice cream better than mint chocolate chip. Now I know I'm probably making some people mad at home or wherever you happen to be watching this right now. And I have no preference for either of these ice creams. I just want to get that out there. Okay. So I'm making a clear prediction about the relationship. What we want to graduate to from conceptual hypotheses is stating research hypotheses. This is a testable prediction about relationships among the observations and the studies. So it's not enough for me to just say people are going to like cookie dough ice cream more than mint chocolate chip ice cream. Here, I would have to specify this in a testable way. People are going to rate cookie dough ice cream on this scale that we have that tests preferences or tests pleasantness higher than people who eat mint chocolate chip. So you see there, that's testable. I can actually observe that. So it gets more specific. So let's take a different example. We all have experienced what this person on the left is experiencing. This is called ostracism. They're being left out of the conversation. We all know that this hurts and makes us feel really bad. So let's go over the three parts of theorizing and hypothesizing through an example about why ostracism hurts so bad. Um, so our friend Kip Williams from Purdue University developed a theory called the temporal need threat model. And he says that humans have evolved to depend on each other. And when we're excluded by our peers, it threatens our existence. If you've ever taken a class on cultural anthropology or physical anthropology, pretty much anything in anthropology, um, you probably learned that humans evolved in small groups. And if you were ostracized from that group, you lost all access to food, access to mates, um, access to shelter and protection from the group from predators. And so being ostracized quite literally threatened our existence. It was a great way, and it still is a great way to communicate with our peers that, hey, you're not behaving in a way that is helpful for the group. Um, and because this threatens our existence, Kip Williams developed a hypothesis. So this is one of many conceptual hypotheses from his theory, just one of them. He says that we've evolved a detection system to help us notice social rejection, ostracism. It's kind of like a smoke alarm or a smoke detector. It goes off when there's smoke, or in this case, this goes off in our brain when there's ostracism in the environment. If it threatens our existence, then it should be really important for us to notice that as a species. And one way that we can test this, notice how this is going to get more specific with the research hypothesis. Let's say that we design an experiment where we exclude people or we don't exclude them, they're included. And we are going to expect different brain patterns in what we know of as the neural alarm system called the anterior cingulate cortex of the human brain. So that's very specific here. It's very specific. Okay. The last part of this science as a philosophy that I really want to talk about is the concept of proof in science. So on your own at home, think about how you know somebody loves you. It's easy to know when you love somebody, but how do you know when somebody loves you? What do you observe? What kinds of things do they do and say? And you can pause the lecture and think about this for a second. But what most people end up saying is that, uh, one way that I know somebody loves me is that they spend a lot of time with me. They offer up, their attention. They pay attention to me. They have concern and care for my well-being. They tell me that they love me. But you don't have access to their brains. You don't really truly know how they feel. Um, how do we know that any statement is true? We view the world through our own perceptual systems, and the human brain is an amazing thing. It fills in a lot of the 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 holes that are left when we we're perceiving our world. We don't see a table as millions and trillions of atoms bouncing off of each other. We see it as a table. That's how our brain is designed to to interpret that. So how do we ever know something? And can we ever know that a statement is true? Can you ever truly know that somebody loves you? And I'm going to say that from a philosophical standpoint in science, the answer to that is no. You can never truly know something. So what are we really testing in science? In science, it's kind of like the burden of proof in the legal system. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a reasonable human being would say, okay, this person probably did that thing that they're saying that they did. And the proof is on the prosecution, or here in science, the proof is on the scientist, although we never say the word prove. We always know that there is some doubt in the system. Um, there's some probability involved. And we are essentially collecting evidence that goes against the opposite. The opposite being that, no, this person doesn't really love me. Or maybe in a scientific study on social psychology, maybe social class is not really related to ethical behavior. So this is where we get into the concept of falsifiability. Um, this is our cornerstone in science. We don't ever test if a statement is true. We try to falsify a statement. Okay, so we design a study to falsify that social class is related to ethical behavior. And you all might be scientists in your everyday personal life where you're trying to falsify if Sweetie really loves you or not. So what is falsifiability? It means that a statement can be contradicted by another basic statement. So one example of that is the statement, all swans are white. The statement that can contradict this is that there were black swans on the waterway that day. Even if, even if there were only white swans in the world, this statement would still be falsifiable. This statement that all swans are white would still be falsifiable because if you see a swan that is of a different color than white, you have falsified it. The statement itself contradicts the contention. This is easier to think about when you look um, at uh, at what is unfalsifiable. So let's have a little bit of fun. I have an aunt, her name is Beth, and she is a psychic medium who can channel the dead. She can speak with people who have passed on. And I'm not saying this is not true. I'm just saying that this is unfalsifiable. And Beth has appeared on the TV show Honey Boo Boo and gave a reading for those folks. Um, this statement can't ever be falsified because if it's not true, all we would ever get is an absence of information. Or in other words, it would be like, okay, well, I guess Aunt Beth can't channel the dead today. That's very different from, the presence of a black swan falsifying the existence of only white swans. So, um, I just want to show you this. I do so in fun. This is my Aunt Beth's website. You can get on here and work with anything that she's posted. There she is, um, and in all her glory. She's got a story, and you can get a reading. Oh, look at that, the lens flare there in the camera. I guess she's saying that that's a spirit that is passed on. Again, we can't ever falsify that Aunt Beth is a psychic medium. Um, okay. And another example might be that Loch Ness contains a giant reptile. Um, we are all familiar with Nessie. This statement is unfalsifiable. If the statement's wrong, all we'll ever find is an absence of evidence that the reptile is not there. There's nothing but small fish in the loch. Okay. So again, this is our logical cornerstone. We don't try to ever prove anything. We can't prove anything in science. We design ways to falsify. The last topic that I'd like to get into uh, today is that science is really an art. Take a few moments to look at this paper clip and think of different ways that you could use this paper clip other than clipping paper together. So go ahead and pause the lecture and see what you come up with. So you might have some really creative ideas like using it to unlock a door or using it to protect yourself as you walk across the parking lot. I've heard people using this as like hair clips where they, clip their hair with the paper clip. Tons of fun ways that you can bring this together. Um, Back to our friend Einstein, I have a quote here from him is that the great scientists are artists as well. Whenever we design something scientifically, um, it takes a lot of creativity to get there. So think about this Van Gogh painting that's right in front of you. What kinds of emotions is it bringing up in you? Um, you know, Van Gogh used a lot of yellow to create feelings of warmth and hope in his paintings, but also there was some darkness and wispiness in these paintings. It's kind of a subdued mood that this image puts into our hearts and minds. And we do a lot of that too as social psychologists. So I've got some really great examples of how scientists are creative here. One is in a study of self-compassion. Self-compassion is this construct where we are comfortable in our mistakes. We understand that we are human and our mistakes actually hold some common humanity with others. And it used to be that we measured self-compassion with only pen and paper measures. And the scientists were really frustrated by this because that would only allow us to have correlational evidence. And so they said, how can we experimentally manipulate in the lab the feeling of self-compassion, almost like Van Gogh trying to put an emotion, put you into an emotional state. How can we get people to feel this, cognition of self-compassion? So in a study by Neff and colleagues, they said, we're going to draw from humanistic Gestalt psychology that uses a therapy called the two-chair technique, in which the participant, this is the person here in yellow, kind of like almost like a Dwight Schrute yellow, is essentially having a conversation with himself, imagining himself in this other chair and listening to himself compassionately. This was a therapeutic technique that was used by Gestalt um, Gestalt psychologists, clinical psychologists, to create a sense of self-compassion. That once you finally listen to yourself, you start to realize, whoa, I can step outside and see I'm human just like everybody else. We have a tendency to be very unkind to ourselves sometimes, and this is the technique that they use. Don't ask me how they designed a control group, because one, I don't know, and I would not have been very creative to design that. But this is how they use their creativity to experimentally manipulate self-compassion. Another fun example comes from a psychologist named Leon Fessinger, who studied cognitive dissonance. Um, Cognitive dissonance is this idea that when our attitudes clash with our reality, or in other words, kind of like me when I was an 18-year-old at Beach Week, right after my senior year of high school. I had an attitude that smoking cigarettes was bad for you, but there I was on the beach, with my buddies smoking a cigarette. That this reality of I'm doing something that clashes with my attitude causes a state of unpleasantness. And we do our best to get rid of this unpleasantness by rationalizing our actions. Or in other words, we give reasons for our behaviors that are not grounded in reality. So Fessinger had this theory and he had no way to actually test it. And so he got this bright idea of following a cult called the Seekers in the early 1950s. And as the story goes, the leader, Marion Keech, she had folks on December 21st, um, essentially in her home. These folks had joined the cult and had given off all their worldly possessions, so on and so forth. You know how this goes. And they believed that aliens from the planet Clarion were going to come down on December 21st, 1954, and essentially save them before the world was destroyed. As the night went on, the aliens never showed up, and people started to get really upset. Now, remember, they've sold off all their worldly possessions. We have attitudes that we are supposed to conform with societal standards. You're supposed to have a home. You're supposed to, have a family and social connections. And these folks gave all that up. Their behavior was inconsistent with their attitudes. And so over a span of hours, Marion Keech finally hit upon an idea, and this was completely a rationalization. A rationalization. She said, I know what happened. The aliens saw us, they saw our faith, and they spared us. They spared the entire world because of our faith. Now, this is not grounded in reality. It could be true, but it's unfalsifiable. We have no way to test that scientifically. Um, and and this was the first example, Leon Fessinger said, of cognitive dissonance. How creative do you have to be to join a cult as a social psychologist? Man, I really wish I could join a cult in the name of science. That would be a lot of fun. So, one thing I want to convey to you is that scientific ideas don't just happen, they come from being creative. Creativity we define as a novel process that produces novel responses. They help us to solve problems. Um, and who is creative? There's a lot of different personality types that are creative. This person, Jimi Hendrix, is really creative. Um, and maybe you might know that the way that he's holding this guitar is kind of weird. Um, Jimi Hendrix was a left-handed guitarist, and he is playing a right-handed guitar there. So took a lot of creativity. Now, when we think about creative people, we tend to think that, they just kind of got to this by happenstance. And no, that's not how this happens. You have to get a large knowledge base. Jimi Hendrix probably spent, hours and years and decades of his life dedicating to learning how to play the guitar. And he was probably the best lead guitarist who has ever lived and shared a lifetime with us on this planet. You have to have a commitment to solving problems, the problem that you're dedicated to solving, and you have to practice, practice, practice. Okay, so this is why we spend 5, 6, 7 years in PhD programs. And the issue with this is that you all only have 5 weeks to design a study, not 10 years. So you might not be very creative, and that's okay. There's some time constraints on this. You don't have the time to gather a large knowledge base and practice. Um, there's other personality variables that are linked to creativity, and I can let you read through these, but this might not be who you are, and that's totally okay. But there are still ways that you can create a sense of creativity in yourself, even if these personality variables don't line up with you. So first things first, to be creative, you got to really immerse yourself in the thing. Um, so come to class, work on work on your projects, read the readings that are assigned, do the quizzes, watch these lectures. Then you have to give yourself a break from the thing. Um, so even if that is, studying something else, another class that you're taking this summer. And then when you get an idea, stop what you're doing and write it down. Let yourself think. And then you go back to the idea and assess it later. See if it's a good one. So these are usually the stages of creativity. Again, this takes a lot of time that you don't have. So maybe there's some other shortcuts that I can give you to think about being creative. So here's what I think you can do with your teams. First thing first is that science is social. Have these water cooler conversations. Or in other words, you know, time talking with your peers is not wasted time. You're going to get a lot of this time in class when you're able to work on different aspects of your assignment. Don't look for answers. Ask questions. Ask questions. What's the best way to do this project? Right. And then work with your peers on that. And then another way to be creative is to notice psychological processes as they happen right in front of your face in everyday life. And maybe you're on public transportation, like a bus or something like that. Look around you, notice what's going on. Maybe you're at the grocery store, and you know you notice something there that helps you to do your final project. So again, science helps us to learn about ourselves. So that's it for this lecture. This lecture is associated with quiz 1, and you'll have until midnight on May 19th to complete it. Thanks, everybody.